There are films that entertain you for a few hours, and then there are films that seem to open a doorway into another world. The Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, belongs to that second kind. From the moment the screen fades into darkness and an ancient voice begins to speak of power, loss, and a ring that refuses to be forgotten, the film does not simply ask you to watch. It asks you to step inside. It asks you to believe that somewhere beyond the ordinary world, mountains carry our secrets. Forests remember every footstep, and the smallest person can become the center of the greatest story ever told. Welcome back to the Fin Box, where we do not stop at what happens on the screen. We look at why it happens, how it is built, what it hides, and why certain moments stay with us long after the final image disappears. Today, we are opening one of the most influential fantasy films ever made, but we are also opening something more personal. We are looking at a story about fear, friendship, temptation, courage, and the terrible weight of carrying something you never asked to hold. The Fellowship of the Ring is often remembered for its scale. The sweeping landscapes, the armies, the creatures, the ancient kingdoms, the music that seems to rise from the earth itself. But what makes the film endure is not only its size. It is the way that enormous world is built around very small human feelings. The fear of leaving home, the pain of saying goodbye, the uncertainty of trusting someone. The moment when a friend decides not to let you walk into darkness alone, that is where the film becomes more than fantasy. It becomes a mirror. We are going to look beyond the swords, the maps, and the legends. We will examine how Peter Jackson takes a story filled with impossible places and makes it emotionally immediate. We will look at how the camera turns landscapes into mythology, how the music gives cultures their own emotional identity, and how the actors make elves, wizards, hobbits, and dark lords feel completely sincere. We will open up the choices that make the Shire feel safe, Moria feel haunted, and a simple gold ring feel more dangerous than an entire army. But before we go deeper, think about what this story asks of its hero. Frodo Baggins is not introduced as a warrior. He is not searching for glory. He lives in a peaceful corner of the world where the biggest concerns are food, celebrations, gardens, and whether a mysterious relative will cause trouble at a birthday party. Then the world places an impossible burden in his hands. That change is the heartbeat of the film. A quiet life is interrupted by history, and an ordinary person is forced to decide what kind of person he will become. That idea matters because most of us understand it, even without magic rings or dark riders. Life rarely asks whether we feel ready, it simply changes. Responsibility arrives, fear arrives, loss arrives. Sometimes the only choice we control is whether we face it alone or allow others to stand beside us. The Fellowship of the Ring turns that truth into an adventure, but it never lets the adventure erase the truth. Every film is a box. We open it together. And this film is a particularly deep one because every time you think you have reached the center, another layer appears. Beneath the quest is a story about power. Beneath the power is a story about corruption. Beneath the corruption is a story about mercy. And beneath all of it is a quiet question that follows every major character. When the world becomes darker than you expected, what part of yourself will you protect? Some characters answer that question with loyalty. Others answer it with ambition. Some believe strength means control. Others discover that strength can mean refusing control when it is offered. The ring exposes those differences without changing who people are. It simply reveals them. That is why it works as more than a plot device. It becomes a test, a mirror, a promise, a threat. And for every person who comes close to it, the ring whispers a different version of the same lie. You could use this power for good. Here is what most people miss when they remember the film only as the beginning of an epic trilogy. The Fellowship of the Ring is already a complete emotional journey. It begins with comfort, moves through discovery and fear, bends toward unity, and then asks whether unity can survive pressure. The title is not just about a group being formed, it is about the cost of keeping that group together. Fellowship sounds hopeful, but the film understands that real fellowship is proven only when fear, temptation, grief, and disagreement enter the room. That is why our journey through this film will not be a simple retelling. We will look at the moments that create trust, the decisions that quietly predict betrayal, and the visual details that tell you how the world is changing before the characters fully understand it. We will examine why some scenes feel comforting while others feel ancient and dangerous. We will ask why the film can move from humor to horror without breaking its tone. And we will look at the emotional design behind its most unforgettable moments. Whether you have watched this film once or 10 times, there is still something new inside it, a gesture you overlooked, a musical theme that tells you where a character belongs, a choice in framing that makes someone look powerful, isolated, or already lost. Once you understand how carefully the film guides your feelings, you start seeing the journey not only as Frodo's path across Middle-earth, but as a path through different forms of fear. So settle in, picture the green hills, the distant mountains, and the sound of footsteps on an uncertain road. We are beginning where innocence still feels permanent. Danger is only a rumor, and one small object is about to pull an entire world out of balance. The road ahead is long, but that is exactly why it matters. Great journeys do not begin with confidence, they begin with a step. The most powerful thing about the Fellowship of the Ring is not the size of its world, it is the fact that the entire world can be threatened by something small enough to hide in the palm of a hand. That is the tension at the heart of the film. Evil does not first arrive as an army, it arrives as an object, silent, beautiful, almost weightless. It does not look dangerous. It does not need to shout. It waits. It watches. And it understands something frightening about the people who come close to it. Almost everyone believes they would be the exception. They believe they could resist it. They believe they could control it. They believe they could use it for the right reasons. That is where the story becomes more unsettling than a simple battle between heroes and villains. The ring does not tempt people by asking them to become cruel. It tempts them by offering the power to protect what they love. It allows ambition to disguise itself as duty. It turns fear into justification. It makes good intentions feel like permission. Look closer at the people surrounding Frodo. Warriors, kings, wizards, and ancient beings understand far more about the world than he does. Many of them are stronger, more experienced, more capable of surviving danger, yet the future of Middle-earth depends on a hobbit who has barely left home. Why him? That question pulls you through the film. Frodo does not appear qualified for the task. He does not know the roads ahead. He cannot predict who will betray him. He cannot overpower the creatures hunting him. He does not even fully understand the object he carries. But perhaps that is precisely why he has a chance. He does not begin with a hunger for power. He begins with love for home. This is the moment the film changes everything. The world may be filled with kings and legends, but its survival does not rest on the person who can conquer the most. It rests on the person who understands that some power should never be possessed. That idea sounds simple until you see how difficult the film makes it. The ring does not remain passive. It pulls attention toward itself. It changes the emotional temperature of every room it enters. People stare at it too long. Voices become more urgent. Good judgment starts to bend. Even conversations about destroying it become conversations about using it. The film creates suspense not only by asking whether Frodo will survive, but by asking whether the people around him will remain themselves. A monster can be seen, an army can be counted. But temptation does not always announce itself. Sometimes it sounds like your own voice explaining why the wrong decision is necessary. That makes the ring terrifying in a deeply personal way. Imagine being offered the ability to fix the one thing in your life that hurts most. Imagine being told that you could protect your family, defeat your enemies, correct every injustice, and prevent every future loss. The price is not explained clearly. The danger feels distant. The reward feels immediate. Would you refuse? The Fellowship of the Ring understands that the honest answer is not easy. It does not divide its characters into people who feel temptation and people who do not. The strongest characters often feel it most intensely. Their courage is measured not by purity but the choices they make when power speaks directly to their deepest wounds. That is why the film never feels like fantasy built only for escape. beneath the creatures and ancient languages is a story about the weakness hidden inside noble intentions. It asks whether people can recognize the moment when protecting something becomes controlling it. It asks whether fear can turn a good person into the very thing they oppose. And then it places that question inside a journey. The road begins in warmth, food, laughter, music, green fields, and familiar faces. The Shire feels like a place where history has stopped. Nothing truly terrible seems able to reach it. That sense of safety is not accidental. The film wants you to feel what Frodo could lose before it shows you what he must face. Once he leaves, every step takes him farther from certainty. Roads become forests. Forests become ruins. Friendly stories become warnings. The world grows larger, but safety grows smaller. And somewhere behind him, dark riders are moving with a purpose he cannot yet understand. Here is where it gets layered. Frodo is not only carrying the ring away from the Shire, he is carrying the Shire inside himself. Its values travel with him: simplicity, loyalty, humility, the belief that meals, songs, gardens, and friendship are worth protecting. Those qualities might look weak beside armor and magic, but the film slowly reveals them as a form of resistance. The ring thrives on grand desire. It offers visions of greatness. Frodo's connection to ordinary life becomes one of the few things that can pull him back. But even that connection is fragile. The farther he travels, the more isolated he becomes. His companions can protect his body, but they cannot fully enter the burden in his mind. He feels the ring growing heavier, while others see only a small object on a chain. That separation creates one of the film's most painful tensions. Frodo is surrounded by people who care for him, yet part of his journey remains completely private. And that raises another question. Can friendship save someone from a burden that no one else can fully understand? The film does not answer immediately. Instead, it builds the fellowship around that uncertainty. Each member carries a different history, a different loyalty, and a different reason for joining. They do not begin as a perfect family. Some distrust one another. Some carry old rivalries. Some hide shame. Some want redemption. Some simply refuse to abandon a friend. The group is powerful because it is imperfect. Their unity is not automatic. It has to be chosen again and again. That is what makes the title so meaningful. Fellowship is not the absence of conflict. It is the decision to keep moving together despite conflict. The real threat is not only what waits outside the group, it is what fear and temptation might awaken inside it. Picture the journey before it begins. 9 companions stand against the shadows, spreading across an entire world. They are outnumbered before they take the first step. Their animal laces is armies, spies, fortresses, and centuries of patience. Their mission depends on secrecy, trust, and the hope that the smallest member of the group can carry the greatest burden. Nothing about the plan should work. That is exactly why you need to see what happens next. The Fellowship of the Ring hooks you with the promise of an epic adventure. But it keeps you watching with something more intimate. You want to know whether courage can survive fear, whether mercy can matter more than strength, whether friendship can hold when power begins pulling people apart. And most of all, you want to know whether someone who never wanted to become a hero can continue walking when every road leads farther from home. Because in this story, the fate of the world does not begin with a battle, it begins with a decision. Before Frodo takes his first real step beyond the Shire, the film has already completed a journey almost as unlikely as the one on screen. The Fellowship of the Ring did not begin as a safe studio project with a guaranteed result. It began as an enormous gamble, 3 films prepared together, a cast and crew relocated for an unusually long production, and a director trying to turn one of fantasy literature's most protected worlds into something that felt physical, emotional, and lived in. The forced production fact changes the way you see the entire landscape. Peter Jackson chose to make the trilogy in New Zealand, using the country not as a simple background but as the physical foundation of Middle-earth. He explained that both studio work and exterior filming were done there, and that the country offered the range of landscapes he associated with Tolkien's world. Principal photography across the trilogy stretched for roughly 15 months, far beyond the normal rhythm of a feature film. These was not three separate productions politely waiting for one another. Sets, costumes, locations, performances, and storylines from different parts of the trilogy had to exist inside the same massive creative machine. Now, think about what that does to the opening of this film. When the camera moves across the Shire, the land does not feel like a digital illustration placed behind the actors. It feels inhabited because the production treated geography as part of the cast. Hills have weight, roads have distance, weather touches the characters. A mountain is not simply a destination painted in the background. It is a real obstacle occupying the horizon. That physical reality makes Frodo's departure more emotional. Home is not an abstract fantasy location. It is soil, grass, fences, trees, smoke from chimneys, and paths that look as though generations have walked across them. The second fact is that the scale of the production required several filming units to work at once. Jackson described monitoring additional units through satellite feeds, sometimes while crews were operating hundreds of miles apart. On especially busy days, 4 or 5 units could be shooting, leaving hours of footage to review after the day's work was finished. That logistical detail matters because the finished movie feels unified. You never feel as though one landscape belongs to a separate crew or that an action moment has wandered in from another production. The visual language remains connected. The same world seems to continue beyond every cut. That unity is one of the film's quietest achievements. The audience sees a single journey, while behind the camera, many groups were building different pieces of that journey at the same time. The third fact is one of the cleverest. The filmmakers did not rely on one single method to make hobbits appear smaller than humans and wizards. They used green work, separate scale sets, body doubles, and forced perspective rigs designed to preserve the illusion even when the camera moved. For Bag End, the production built differently sized environments so that a normal actor could appear hobbit sized in one version, while Ian McKellen would appear unusually large inside another. Some platforms were linked to camera movement by computers so that actors remained at the correct apparent distance as the shot changed. Look closer at the scenes between Gandalf and the hobbits. The illusion works because it serves a relationship instead of demanding attention. Gandalf feels physically enormous inside Bilbo's home, but the effect also tells you something about the space. Bal End was made for a smaller life. Gandalf is a visitor from a wider and more dangerous world, and his body almost seems unable to fit inside the safety of the Shire. The production technique becomes visual storytelling. The best effects in the film disappear. The eye accepts the size difference, allowing the mind to focus on affection, unease, and the information Gandalf carries. The technical word protects the emotion. The fourth fact is that the film's world was built through a deliberate mixture of practical craft and digital effects. Wata's artists combined detailed miniatures, matte paintings, computer generated elements, and animation systems rather than forcing every problem into a single tool. Contemporary reporting described complex shots constructed from many separate components, with physical miniature work forming one layer and digital environments or animated figures forming others. Weta Digital completed 570 visual effects shots for the Fellowship of the Ring, and some individual shots were far longer and more complicated than the industry norm at the time. That combination explains why the fantasy often has texture. Stone structures appear chipped, aged, wet, or burned because real surfaces were frequently part of the image. Digital work extends a world rather than replacing all of it. You feel that towers have foundations and underground halls have depth. Even when the scale becomes impossible, the image retains small imperfections that make it believable. Take the film's ancient locations. They do not look as though they were constructed yesterday for a production crew. They seem to contain layers of history. The designs suggest that people built them, inhabited them, defended them, abandoned them, and left their failures behind. Practical details give the camera something real to discover, while digital work allows those details to continue beyond the limits of the set. The result is scale without complete weightlessness. The fifth fact concerns color, and it may change the way you read the film's emotional map. Jackson and cinematographer Andrew Lesnie created a color plan for different places and cultures. Bag end was given a warm yellow-orange glow to suggest comfort. Bree used a dirtier, more threatening firelight. Lavender leaned into autumnal tones to express the melancholy of a people whose time in Middle-earth is fading. Moria was shaped with muted green tones that removed from faces and made the environment feel like a tomb. Digital grading then allowed the filmmakers to refine those moves with much more control than traditional timing alone could provide. This detail will hit differently now. The journey is not only moving across a map, it is moving through color. Safety has warmth, suspicion contaminates that warmth. Ancient beauty carries the colors of a season nearing its end. Underground danger drains life from the skin. Before a character explains how a play should make you feel, the image has already told you. That is why the film can change tone so dramatically without feeling random. It moves from celebration to dread, from intimate rooms to enormous ruins, but each location has a carefully designed emotional identity. The colors prepare you for the type of story that can happen there. The Shire invites you to relax. Bree tells you to watch the corners. Rivendell creates a pause that already contains sadness. Moria warns that the past is not sleeping peacefully. And then there is the pressure of finishing the film itself. According to reporting from Wellington in October 2001, visual effects and specialized color processing were still being finalized close to release. Horror Shore introduced another musical idea late in the process, and the team continued mixing into the early morning before the final master was sent out. That last minute intensity does not make the film feel careless, it makes the control of the finished result even more impressive. Picture hundreds of moving pieces, performances, scale illusions, miniature photography, digital extensions, color work, sound, and music. Any one of them could have pulled the audience out of the world. Instead, they reinforce one another. The music lifts the landscape. The color tells you how to feel inside it. The sets give the actors physical history to touch. The scale effects make different races share the frame naturally. The real locations stop the fantasy from floating away. This is not technology fighting craftsmanship. It is technology supporting craftsmanship. Here is what most people miss. The production did not make Middle-earth convincing by making everything enormous. It made Middle-earth convincing by making everything specific. A doorway has the correct height for the person using it. A fireplace gives one village comfort and another village menace. A distant structure carries signs of age. A road curves through really grand rather than ending at the edge of a set. Those choices change how you see the characters. Frodo seems small not only because of visual effects but because the world around him has been designed to show its age and power. Gandalf feels ancient because he belongs naturally inside places that seem older than memory. Aragorn appears connected to the wilderness because the camera allows rain, mud, stone, and distance to remain around him. The environment does not decorate the characters, it reveals them. And that may be the most important production achievement of all. You rarely feel the filmmakers asking you to admire how difficult the movie was to create. The work stays behind the curtain. What reaches the screen is emotion. The Shire feels worth missing. The road feels long. The darkness feels as though it existed before the camera arrived. By the time the story truly begins moving, the production has already convinced you of something essential. This world was here before Frodo, and it will carry the consequences of every choice he makes. Now that we understand how the doorway was built, it is time to step through it and ask, what kind of film is waiting on the other side? Released in 2001 and directed by Peter Jackson, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring is the first chapter of a fantasy trilogy adapted from the novels of J.R.R. Tolkien. It stars Elijah Wood as Frodo Baggins, Ian McKellen as Gandalf, Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn, Sean Astin as Samwise Gamgee, Sean Bean as Boromir, Orlando Bloom as Legolas, John Rhys Davies as Gimli, Dominic Monaghan as Merry, and Billy Boyd as Pippin. That cast list sounds like the beginning of a traditional adventure: a wizard, a warrior, an elf, a dwarf, four hobbits, a dangerous mission. But this film is not interested in presenting them as simple pieces on a fantasy board. Each character enters the journey with a different understanding of courage, power, loyalty, and responsibility. The fellowship is not assembled because these people naturally belong together. It is assembled because the world has reached a point where separation is more dangerous than distrust. At its heart, this is a road movie disguised as a myth. It is about leaving home and discovering that the world is larger, older, and more damaged than you imagined. It is about carrying responsibility before you understand its full weight. It is about the moment when stories of ancient evil stop being stories and begin appearing on the road behind you. The film exists because Tolkien's work offered more than a collection of magical creatures and invented languages. It presented fantasy as history. Middle Earth feels as though countless generations lived, fought, celebrated, and disappeared before Frodo's story began. Every ruin suggests a lost kingdom. Every song seems connected to an old memory. Even the characters who understand the past rarely understand all of it. Peter Jackson's adaptation takes that sense of history and turns it into something cinematic. Instead of explaining every detail, the film allows the world to appear around the characters. Statues stand beside rivers, broken swords remain preserved, old names cause people to lower their voices. Landscapes carry evidence of battles that happened long before the Fellowship was formed. This makes the story feel much bigger than its central mission, but the mission itself remains simple enough to understand. A small and dangerous object must be taken away from the place where it can be used. The people carrying it cannot defeat every enemy they encounter. They cannot announce their purpose. They cannot trust that strength alone will protect them. Their greatest advantage is that their enemy does not fully understand the kind of courage required to destroy power instead of claiming it. That is the moral engine of the film. Most fantasy stories build toward the hero gaining enough power to defeat the villain. The Fellowship of the Ring moves in the opposite direction. The heroes are trying to remove power from the world. Their task is not to master the ring, it is to resist the belief that anyone should master it. This difference gives the film its identity. Battles still matters, leadership matters. But none of those things can complete the mission if the people involved lose control of their desire. The genre moves between epic fantasy, adventure, horror, war drama, and intimate character study. The Shire gives us warmth and humor. The road introduces suspense. Ancient ruins bring a sense of historical tragedy. Darker locations move close to horror. Moments of battle arrive with urgency, but the film repeatedly returns to faces, choices, and relationships. That balance is important because a film of this scale could easily become emotionally distant. Armies and kingdoms can make individual characters feel small in the wrong way. Here, the characters remain the reason the scale matters. A city matters because someone remembers it. A forest matters because someone feels safe inside it. A kingdom matters because someone has spent years avoiding the responsibility of returning to it. And the Shire matters because Frodo loves it. Without that love, the journey would become an exercise in spectacle. With it, every new danger reminds us what he is trying to preserve. The film does not need Frodo to deliver speeches about his home. It places the feeling in the way he looks back, the way he remembers ordinary comforts, and the way Sam treats the boundary of the Shire as though it marks the edge of the known universe. So, what is the spoiler free verdict? The Fellowship of the Ring is a technically extraordinary and deeply sincere fantasy film, but its deliberate pace and enormous amount of world building may not connect equally with everyone. It asks for patience. It introduces cultures, names, histories, and locations without always slowing down to make each one easy to remember. Some people will experience that density as immersion. Others may experience it as distance. The film is also emotionally restrained in places. Its characters are often surrounded by grandeur, and the scale can occasionally overpower the personal drama. Certain relationships become powerful over time, but not every member of the fellowship receives the same depth in this first chapter. Still, when the film works, it works with complete confidence. It does not apologize for its seriousness. It does not treat fantasy as something that needs to be softened with constant jokes or explained through modern attitudes. The characters believe in the world, and that belief invites you to believe in it too. This film is for you if you enjoy slow building adventures, detailed fictional worlds, mythic storytelling, practical environments, sweeping music, and characters whose loyalty develops through shared danger. It is especially rewarding if you like films that become richer when revisited. The first watch gives you the journey. Later watches reveal the architecture underneath it. You begin noticing how early the film introduces the idea of temptation. You see how musical themes attach themselves to places and people. You recognize moments that quietly prepare the emotional consequences of later decisions. What once looked like simple exposition begins to feel like foundation. However, if you prefer fantasy that moves immediately from one action sequence to another, this film may feel heavy. The opening spends time establishing history, community, atmosphere, and emotional contrast. The film wants you to understand peace before it destroys the feeling of safety. It wants the road to feel long. That approach requires trust. You must trust that a quiet conversation will matter later. You must trust that an old story is not being told only for decoration. You must trust that the space between battles contains the real reason the battles matter. The Fellowship of the Ring is ultimately a story about what people choose when certainty disappears. Some move toward power, some move toward duty, some move toward friendship. Frodo moves forward because standing still would allow danger to reach everything he loves. But knowing what kind of film this is does not fully explain what it feels like to watch it for the first time. The facts can identify the director, the cast, and the genre. They cannot recreate the sensation of seeing the Shire appear, hearing its music, and feeling the first shadow pass across a world that seemed untouchable. To understand that, we have to return to the beginning and remember what it feels like when the door to Middle-earth opens for the first time. The first time the Fellowship of the Ring opens in front of you, it does not feel like a film rushing to impress. It feels like a world remembering something. The opening voice reaches back through centuries of history, describing power, betrayal, war, and the loss of an object that should never have existed. Before we properly meet Frodo, the film has already shown us kingdoms collapsing beneath the weight of ambition. The scale is enormous. Armies crash into one another. Ancient figures stand against darkness. History feels violent, distant, and almost impossible to contain. Then the film cuts to the Shire. That transition is everything. Suddenly, the noise disappears. Green hills replace burning battlefields. The air feels softer. The world becomes smaller, warmer, and more personal. Instead of kings and armies, we see ordinary people enjoying food, gossip, gardens, and celebrations. The contrast creates an immediate emotional effect. You understand that the darkness shown in the beginning belongs to the same world, but it feels impossibly far away. That distance gives the Shire its innocence. I walked in expecting a grand fantasy adventure filled with battles, monsters, and heroic speeches, but the film gave me something quieter first. It gave me a place worth protecting. That choice is what hooked me. The opening does not demand that you care about the fate of Middle Earth as an abstract idea. It introduces a home. The houses are small, but they feel complete. The paths curve through fields instead of leading toward war. People know one another's habits. Celebrations are treated like major events. Food appears important. Time seems slower. The Shire is not perfect. People can be nosy, stubborn, and suspicious of anything unusual, but those flaws make it feel real. This is not a paradise built from flawless citizens. It is a community built from familiarity. The people belong to one another even when they irritate one another. That feeling becomes the emotional foundation of the entire film. When Gandalf arrives, the world expands without becoming frightening immediately. His presence carries mystery, but it also carries comfort. He is someone who belongs to stories beyond the Shire, yet he understands its simple joys. His arrival gives the opening a sense of anticipation. Something important is coming, but for a few moments, importance means a birthday party. The celebration is one of the film's most effective early sequences because it shows what peace looks like before peace becomes fragile. There are lights, music, jokes, dancing, and children waiting for fireworks. The camera moves through the gathering with energy, allowing the share to feel alive rather than decorative. You can almost forget the darkness from the beginning. That is exactly what the film wants. Then small details begin to disturb the comfort. Bilbo's behavior becomes slightly harder to explain. His attachment to the ring feels more intense than it should. Gandalf's expression changes. The warm atmosphere remains, but something cold has entered it. The danger does not arrive through an attack. It appears inside a private conversation. This is where the film becomes difficult to look away from. The ring is physically tiny, but every person near it begins reacting as though the room has changed shape. Bilbo's affection turns defensive. Gandalf's concern becomes fear. A simple object starts exposing emotional tension that had been hidden beneath the celebration. The scene works because it does not immediately explain everything. You understand enough to feel uneasy, but not enough to feel safe. The film trusts silence, facial expressions, and pauses. It allows the audience to recognize danger before Frodo understands it. That gap between what you know and what Frodo knows creates suspense. For Frodo, Bilbo's departure is personal. It is a painful change inside his family. For Gandalf, the departure reveals something much larger. The ring may be connected to an old evil that never truly disappeared. The film begins separating their perspectives. Frodo sees an inheritance, Gandalf sees a threat. The transformation of the atmosphere is gradual. The colors remain warm, the furniture remains familiar. The Shire has not physically changed. But knowledge changes the meaning of everything. A quiet home becomes a place where danger may already be hiding. A road that once looked inviting becomes a route someone could use to find you. That is one of the strongest feelings in the first part of the film. Safety does not vanish all at once. It becomes uncertain. Once Gandalf leaves to investigate, Frodo continues living inside that uncertainty without fully understanding it. Time passes, the Shire appears normal, but the audience remembers the opening. We remember the armies, the ring, and the shadow connected to it. Every peaceful moment begins carrying tension underneath it. Then Gandalf returns, and the truth becomes impossible to avoid. The scene in Back End is intimate, but the implications are global. The camera does not need to show an army outside. The danger is already on the table. Frodo is forced to understand that something he considered part of his family's history may now place everyone around him at risk. This is the point where the film changes its emotional direction. The opening hour is not simply about beginning a quest, it is about watching the idea of home become vulnerable. Frodo does not leave because he wants adventure. He leaves because staying would allow danger to settle around the people he loves. That motivation makes the journey feel different from the beginning. There is no excitement in his departure. There is urgency, confusion, and sadness. He does not have a clear destination beyond the next safe place. He does not possess a complete plan. The road is not calling him toward greatness, it is pulling him away from comfort. Sam changes the feeling of that departure. Without Sam, Frodo's journey might feel completely isolating. Sam brings loyalty, hesitation, humor, and fear. He is not fearless, he is deeply aware of how far he is moving from everything familiar. When he reaches the point beyond which he has never traveled, the moment is small but emotionally precise. The world has not changed visually. It is still a field under an open sky. Yet for Sam, the boundary is enormous. One more step turns memory into uncertainty. That is when the journey begins to feel real. The film understands that adventure is measured differently by different people. A warrior might consider crossing a kingdom ordinary. For Sam, leaving the known paths of the Shire is already an act of courage. His bravery begins before swords are drawn. The first signs of danger on the road are handled with restraint. The landscape remains beautiful, but the characters begin hiding within it. The open world no longer feels completely welcoming. Trees and hills can conceal something. Silence becomes suspicious. Then the riders appear. Their arrival changes the film's language. Movement slows. Sound becomes oppressive. The peaceful road transforms into a hunting ground. The figures are frightening not because the film explains them, but because it withholds their humanity. Their faces are hidden. Their movements feel unnatural. They seem less like travelers and more like pieces of darkness that have taken shape. The tension comes from the difference in power. Frodo and the others have no chance in a direct confrontation. They can only hide, remain silent, and hope the thing searching for them does not look closely enough. The scene beneath the tree makes the world feel suddenly smaller. A landscape that once represented freedom now offers only a few inches of safety. This detail will hit differently now. The film does not begin its central adventure by making Frodo feel heroic. It makes him feel hunted. That decision creates empathy. We are not admiring him from a distance. We are trapped beside him. We hear the danger approaching. We feel the ring approaching. We feel the ring pulling at his attention. We understand that using it may offer escape, yet also sense that the escape would carry another kind of danger. The first 10 minutes hook you through contrast, but the first section keeps you through escalation. Every new piece of information makes the world less secure. A celebration reveals a secret becomes a threat, a road becomes a chase, and still the film never loses the beauty of the world. That balance matters. The landscapes remain breathtaking even as danger enters them. The audience continues wanting to explore Middle Earth, despite learning that exploration has consequences. Wonder and fear exist together. That is the atmosphere the film creates, ancient, beautiful, and unsafe. Middle Earth feels like a place where every hill may hide a story, but not every story ended well. The past is always present. People inherit victories, failures, promises, and mistakes made long before they were born. Frodo's journey begins when one of those old mistakes reaches his front door. By the time he leaves the Shire, I am no longer watching because I want to see a fantasy world. I am watching because I understand what he is losing by entering it. The road has opened. Home is behind him. And the feeling that something is following never completely disappears. The Fellowship of the Ring does not make Middle-earth believable by showing you everything at once. It makes the world believable by controlling exactly how much you can see, how long you can see it, and where the camera places you inside it. The first major technique is scale. The film constantly reminds you that Frodo is physically small, but it avoids making him emotionally insignificant. Wide shots place him against mountains, forests, ruins, and empty roads that seem capable of swallowing him. Then the film cuts close to his face, allowing fear, uncertainty, and determination to fill the frame. That contrast turns scale into character development. In the wide shot, Frodo appears vulnerable. In the close up, his decision becomes enormous. This is why the landscapes never feel like simple travel photography. They are used to measure the difficulty of the journey. A distant mountain is not only beautiful, it represents time, danger, exhaustion, and the frightening amount of road still ahead. The characters often appear as tiny shapes moving across the frame, making their mission feel almost impossible before an enemy even appears. The Shire is filmed differently. The camera frequently remains close to the ground, moving through gates, gardens, pathways, and crowded interiors. Rounded doors and windows repeat across the environment. The visual lines are soft. The homes seem connected to the land rather than constructed against it. There are few harsh angles and the movement often feels relaxed. This creates a world built around comfort. The camera does not look down upon the hobbits as though they are children. It enters their environment at their level. Tables, chairs, food, fireplaces, and doorways feel naturally proportioned to their lives. When Gandalf enters Bag End, his height disrupts that visual harmony. He must bend. He bumps into objects. The room suddenly seems smaller. That is more than a joke about size. Gandalf physically brings the wider world into a space that was never designed to contain it. The lighting inside the Shire supports the same feeling. Warm light spreads across wooden surfaces and rounded walls. Faces are given a healthy golden quality. Even night scenes contain lanterns, candles, fireworks, or firelight. Darkness exists, but it has not yet become threatening. When the story moves beyond the Shire, that warmth gradually weakens. Bree still uses firelight, but it feels smoky and contaminated. Shadows dominate the corners. The rain makes every exterior surface look cold and unwelcoming. The prancing pony is crowded, yet Frodo feels more exposed there than he did on an empty road. The lighting allows faces to appear and disappear, reinforcing the idea that identities and intentions are difficult to read. The film uses darkness differently depending on location. In the Shire, darkness is evening. In Bree, darkness is suspicion. In Moria, darkness is history. That distinction gives every place an emotional identity. Camera movement also changes with the level of danger. During peaceful moments, movement is often smooth and observational. The camera glides through the birthday celebration or follows characters across the countryside without creating panic. When the Black Riders approach, movement becomes more aggressive. The camera pushes toward faces, races across the landscape, or suddenly changes perspective. The riders are often introduced through fragments: a dark shape, a gloved hand, a hidden face, a horse reacting violently. The film delays the full image because incomplete information is more frightening. You cannot study them properly, so you cannot reduce them to ordinary enemies. They remain close to nightmares. This technique appears again when the film enters horror. Instead of depending only on what a creature looks like, the film builds fear through sound, reaction, and anticipation. Characters hear something before they see it. Dust moves, stone shifts. The environment seems to recognize danger before the fellowship does. The editing rhythm is essential to this effect. The film is often patient when establishing a place. It allows you to understand the geography before conflict begins. You see the bridge, the doorway, the staircase, or the surrounding cliffs. Then, when danger arrives, the cuts become faster, but the location remains understandable. This is why many action sequences feel exciting without becoming visually confusing. You usually know where the characters are trying to go, what is blocking them, and what will happen if they fail. The physical objective remains clear. Action becomes storytelling rather than decoration. During the flight or the ferry, the editing alternates between the hobbits, the riders, and the shrinking distance between them. The scene is not complicated, but the timing creates urgency. Each cut answers one question and introduces another. How close are the riders? Can the hobbits reach the crossing? Who is falling behind? The geography makes the suspense work. Later, larger sequences use the same principle. The film may include multiple characters fighting at once, but it repeatedly returns to the emotional center of the scene: a look of fear, a desperate decision, someone choosing to protect another person. These close ups prevent action from becoming anonymous. Color is another form of storytelling. The Shire is dominated by green, yellow, brown, and warm natural light. Rivendell introduces gold, red, and soft autumnal tones. It is beautiful, but the beauty contains sadness. Leaves appear to be falling. Light moves through the architecture as though the place exists between memory and disappearance. Rivendell does not feel like a kingdom at the beginning of its history. It feels like a place gracefully approaching the end of one. The production design strengthens this idea. Elven structures often contain open spaces, flowing lines, natural forms, and delicate detail. The architecture appears connected to water, trees, and light. It suggests a culture that has shaped nature without completely dominating it. Moria creates the opposite feeling. Its architecture is massive, geometric, and severe. Columns disappear into darkness. Doorways feel built for a civilization greater in size and ambition than the travelers passing through them. The fellowship seems temporary inside a place constructed to outlast individuals, but the halls are empty. That emptiness changes grandeur into grief. The design tells you that achievement cannot protect a civilization forever. What was once powerful has become a tomb. The visual texture shifts as the journey becomes darker. Clean paths give way to mud, broken stone, smoke, ash, underground dust, and weathered surfaces. Costumes gather dirt, faces become tired. The journey leaves physical evidence on the characters. This is important because fantasy can sometimes make travel feel weightless. Here, distance changes people. Clothing becomes worn, hair becomes wet, injuries remain visible. The environment pushes back. The camera also uses framing to reveal relationships. Sam is frequently positioned close to Frodo even before the journey becomes truly dangerous. His loyalty is communicated through physical proximity. When Frodo becomes more isolated, the distance between them inside the frame becomes meaningful. Aragorn is often introduced at the edge of light or partly hidden. His first appearance presents him as someone difficult to read. He watches before he acts. As the fellowship begins trusting him, the framing becomes more open, allowing him to occupy the center more confidently. Boromir is framed with strength, but also with separation. He belongs to the group, yet his attention repeatedly moves toward the ring. The camera notices these moments before the story fully explains their importance. A glance lasts slightly too long. His position in the frame becomes tense. He may stand among companions while appearing mentally somewhere else. Here is what most people miss. The film often uses eyes as a visual warning. Characters do not need to announce temptation. The camera moves close enough to show attention becoming desire. When someone looks at the ring, the surrounding world seems to disappear for a moment. The object gains control of the composition. Sound design completes the illusion. The ring has an identity before it performs any obvious action. Its presence is marked by whispers, changes in atmosphere, and unnatural shifts in sound. When Frodo feels its influence, the soundscape narrows. Ordinary noise fades. The ring seems to create a private space between itself and the person it is tempting. The Black Riders receive their own sonic character. Their cries do not sound fully human, and their movement carries an oppressive weight. You often hear them as a disturbance before seeing them clearly. The Shire, by contrast, is filled with conversation, music, animals, laughter, and ordinary activity. Its soundscape feels socially alive. Leaving it means leaving not only a place, but a particular kind of sound. Howard Shore's music ties all these techniques together. The Shire theme is gentle and circular, evoking familiarity and return. The music associated with the fellowship grows as the group gains unity. Darker musical ideals feel heavier and less stable, suggesting that evil is not merely approaching from outside but working through fear and temptation. The score rarely tells you only that something is exciting or sad. It tells you what the moment means within the larger journey. A simple melody can remind you of home where Frodo is far away from it. A heroic theme can appear before the heroes fully believe in themselves. A darker idea can interrupt a peaceful moment, warning that safety is temporary. The film's greatest technical achievement is the way these choices disappear into emotion. You do not need to notice the lens, the lighting, the miniature, the sound layer, or the edit to feel their combined effect. You simply believe that the Shire is warm. You believe that Moria is dead. You believe that the ring is watching. And you believe that every step forward carries the fellowship farther into a world where the landscape, the history, and even the silence can turn against them. The story begins long before Frodo understands that he is part of it. Thousands of years earlier, rings of power are created and given to the rulers of elves, dwarfs, and men. But in the land of Mordor, the Dark Lord Sauron secretly forges another ring, one designed to control the others. He pours so much of his own power into it that the ring becomes more than a weapon. It becomes a piece of him. A great alliance rises against Sauron. In the chaos of battle, Isildur cuts the link from Sauron's hand, destroying his physical form. But when Isildur is given the chance to destroy the ring, he refuses. He believes he can keep it as payment for what he has lost. That decision becomes the first warning of the story. The ring does not need Sauron to survive. It only needs someone to believe that possessing it is safer than destroying it. Isildur is eventually killed and the ring disappears beneath the water. Centuries pass. History forgets where it went, but the ring waits until it is discovered by a creature named Gollum. It consumes his mind and extends his life, leaving him trapped between love and hatred for the object he calls his precious. Then the ring abandons him. It is found by Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit who carries it back to the Shire without understanding its true identity. Years later, Bilbo prepares to celebrate his 111th birthday. The entire community gathers for food, music, fireworks, and a speech from a host who has always seemed slightly more adventurous than the people around him. Frodo enjoys the celebration without realizing it is also a farewell. Bilbo uses the ring to vanish in front of the crowd, turning his dramatic exit into proof that the object still holds power over him. Inside Bag End, Gandalf confronts him. Bilbo becomes defensive and frighteningly possessive, but after a painful struggle with himself, he leaves the ring behind. That act matters. Bilbo does not defeat the ring, he barely releases it. But in doing so, he achieves something very few people can. Frodo inherits Bag End and the mysterious object. Gandalf initially treats the ring with suspicion rather than certainty. He leaves the Shire to investigate, searching through old records and connecting Bilbo's ring to the one Isildur failed to destroy. When Gandalf returns, he places the ring in the fire. It remains cool. Strange writing appears along its surface, confirming his fear. The ring belongs to Sauron. Sauron's strength is returning, and his servants are searching for the object that can restore him completely. Gollum has already revealed two words under torture: Shire and Baggins. Frodo's home is no longer safe. Gandalf tells him that the ring must leave immediately. Frodo does not understand the size of the mission yet. He believes he is only carrying it toward a safer location. Sam is pulled into the plan after Gandalf discovers him listening outside the window, and the two hobbits leave together. They are soon joined by Merry and Pippin, whose accidental involvement becomes permanent when the danger behind them grows too close to ignore. The Black Riders enter the Shire like shadows from another world. They are the Nazgul, former kings of men whose desire for power turned them into servants of the ring. Their arrival transforms familiar roads into traps. The hobbits hide beneath tree roots as one rider searches for them. Frodo feels the ring pulling him toward it. Wearing it might hide him from ordinary sight, but it would reveal him more clearly to the enemy hunting him. He resists. For now, the group escapes across the river and reaches the village of Bree, where Gandalf was supposed to meet them. But he is not there. Unknown to Frodo, Gandalf has already sought help from Saruman, the head of his order. Gandalf expects wisdom and support. Instead, he discovers that Saruman has chosen survival through submission. Saruman believes Sauron cannot be defeated and offers Gandalf a place beside the rising power. Gandalf refuses. The two wizards fight, and Saruman imprisons him at the top of his tower. Beneath them, the surrounding land is torn apart. Trees are destroyed. Fires are lit. An army begins taking shape in mud, machinery, and darkness. Saruman is not merely joining the enemy, he is building a new kind of war. Back in Bree, Frodo accidentally places the ring on his finger. The ordinary world disappears, and he sees the Nazgul in their true form. Far away, Sauron becomes aware of him. Frodo removes the ring, but the mistake has exposed his location. A mysterious ranger called Strider leads the hobbits away from the inn before the riders attack. At first, they do not know whether to trust him. He appears secretive, armed, and familiar with danger. But he knows who is hunting them, and he understands the road better than they do. Strider is actually Aragorn, heir to the throne of Gondor, though he does not carry himself like a king. He guides the hobbits through the wilderness toward Rivendell. At the ruins of Weathertop, the Nazgûl surround them. Frodo gives in to the ring's pull and wears it. In the Shadow World, the riders become clear. Their leader stabs him with a cursed blade. Aragorn drives them back with fire, but the wound is already pulling Frodo toward darkness. The group races for Rivendell while Frodo grows weaker. Arwen, enough connected deeply to Aragorn, takes Frodo onto her horse and outruns the riders. At the river, she calls upon the water to rise against them. Frodo survives, but the wound never becomes meaningless. The journey has marked him. When he awakens in Rivendell, Gandalf is beside him. The wizard escaped Saruman with the help of a great eagle, but his news is grim. The enemy is growing stronger, and the ring cannot remain where it is. Representatives from across Middle-earth gather to decide what must be done. Elves, dwarves, and men argue over responsibility, history, and power. Boromir of Gondor believes the ring could be used against Sauron. Others understand that anyone attempting to control it would eventually be controlled. The ring must be destroyed in the fires where it was created. The path leads directly into Mordor. The council begins breaking apart under distrust. Frodo watches people who are stronger and wiser than him fail to agree. Then he offers to carry the ring, even though he does not know the way. The room becomes silent. His decision does not solve the danger, but it gives everyone else something to answer. Gandalf joins him. Aragorn offers his sword. Legolas offers his bow. Gimli offers his axe. Boromir commits his strength. Sam refuses to be left behind, while Merry and Pippin insist on joining as well. 9 companions set out together. For a moment, the fellowship seems capable of anything. They travel toward the mountain pass of Caladhras, but Saruman uses the storm against them. Snow traps the group, and continuing would mean death. The only remaining route runs beneath the mountains, through the mines of Moria. Gandalf fears that path. The others do not yet understand why. At the sealed entrance, Frodo solves the simple riddle that allows them inside, but the lake behind them erupts. A creature attacks and collapses the entrance, trapping the fellowship underground. The mines are silent. Gimli expected to find his people alive. Instead, the halls are abandoned. The group discovers that the dwarven colony has been destroyed. In a burial chamber, they find the remains of its last defenders and a written record describing how their hope disappeared. Pippin accidentally sends an object crashing into a well. The sound continues downward. Then something answers. Orcs attack the chamber, followed by a cave troll. The Fellowship fights as a group, each member revealing what they bring to the mission. Aragorn and Boromir hold the line. Legolas moves with impossible speed. Gimli fights with rage. The hobbits survive through courage, luck, and the refusal of their friends to abandon them. Frodo appears to be killed when the troll drives a weapon into him, but Bilbo's hidden gift saves his life, a shot of mithril armor. The relief is brief. A deeper presence awakens inside the mountain. The orcs retreat, not because they fear the fellowship, but because they fear what is coming. A Balrog emerges from flame and shadow. Gandalf understands that the others cannot defeat it. He confronts the creature on the narrow bridge, breaks the path beneath it, and appears to win. Then the Balrog's whip catches him. Gandalf falls into darkness. The fellowship escapes, but the emotional structure of the group has been shattered. Gandalf was their guide, their protection, and the one person who seemed to understand the full road ahead. Aragorn forces the survivors to keep moving. He appears harsh because stopping would leave them exposed, but the decision also reveals the burden shifting onto him. They reach the elven realm of Lothlorien, where Galadriel sees the fear hidden inside each companion. Frodo offers her the ring. For a moment, she imagines what she might become if she accepted it. She refuses. Her rejection proves that temptation can be survived, but the vision also shows how dangerous the ring would be, even in the hands of someone who believes they would use it beautifully. Galadriel gives the fellowship gifts for the road. The group continues by river, moving closer to the moment when they must choose their next direction. But the ring has already begun breaking them apart. Boromir's concern for Gondor has become obsession. He sees his homeland standing against Sauron while others debate and retreat. To him, the ring looks like the weapon his people desperately need. He approaches Frodo alone and tries to persuade him. When persuasion fails, desperation takes over. Boromir attempts to seize the ring. Frodo escapes by wearing it. From the shadow world, he sees the scale of the enemy and realizes that the fellowship cannot protect him from what the ring awakens inside them. Aragorn finds Frodo and understands what he has decided. Frodo asks whether Aragorn would take the ring from him. Aragorn closes Frodo's hand around it. He refuses the power. That choice separates Aragorn from Isildur and proves that inherited failure does not have to become repeated failure. The enemy attacks before the group can recover. Uruk-hai warriors sent by Saruman overwhelm the area. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli fight to protect the hobbits. Boromir, horrified by what he tried to do, hears Merry and Pippin calling for help. He runs toward them. He fights until arrows bring him down. But even while dying, he continues trying to protect the hobbits. The Uruk-hai capture Merry and Pippin and disappear into the forest. Aragorn reaches Boromir too late to save him. Boromir admits his failure and recognizes Aragorn as the leader Gondor will need. His final act does not erase his weakness, but it reveals that the weakness never fully defined him. Meanwhile, Frodo prepares to cross the river alone. He believes isolation is the only way to protect the others. Sam sees him leaving and follows, even though he cannot swim. He enters the water and begins sinking. Frodo turns back. He pulls Sam into the boat. The moment answers the question that has followed the story from the Shire. Frodo may have to carry the burden personally, but he does not have to carry it without love. Across the river, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli choose not to follow Frodo immediately. Merry and Pippin have been taken, and abandoning them would betray the purpose of the fellowship. The group has broken physically, but its values survive in separate directions. Frodo and Sam look toward Mordor. Neither of them knows how they will cross the land ahead. They have lost their guide. The enemy knows they are coming. The fellowship is scattered. Gandalf is gone. Boromir is dead, and the road now leads directly toward the darkest place in Middle-earth. Frodo begins to lose hope. Sam reminds him of the promise they made. Together they continue walking. The film ends its first chapter not with victory but with commitment. The heroes are divided. The mission is more dangerous than ever. Yet every important choice has become clearer. Power cannot be trusted. Courage does not require certainty. Failure does not erase the possibility of redemption, and fellowship is not destroyed simply because friends can no longer walk on the same road. The ring has exposed fear, ambition, loyalty, and sacrifice inside every person who approached it. What began as a journey to carry an object has become a test of who these characters truly are. And this is the moment the box opens completely. What the Fellowship of the Ring does brilliantly is make an impossible world feel emotionally real. The film contains wizards, elves, dwarves, monsters, ancient kingdoms, supernatural objects, and histories stretching across thousands of years. Yet its strongest moments are rarely strong because they are fantastic. They walk because the emotions underneath them are recognizable. The first major strength is the acting. Ian McKellen commands the screen as Gandalf because he never plays the character as a distant symbol of wisdom. Gandalf can be warm, amused, impatient, frightened, and uncertain. He arrives in the Shire with the energy of an old friend, smiling as children chase his cart. But when he begins understanding what Bilbo's ring truly is, that warmth becomes controlled fear. One specific scene proves the depth of McKellen's performance. Gandalf's confrontation with Bilbo inside Bag End. Bilbo refuses to leave the ring behind. His voice becomes defensive, and for a brief moment, his familiar face appears distorted by possessiveness. Gandalf responds with power, but McKellen does not turn the scene into a simple display of authority. Beneath his anger is sadness. He understands that the object has already damaged his friend. When Gandalf reminds Bilbo that he is trying to help him, the emotional force comes from betrayal being prevented rather than battle being won. Gandalf could dominate the room, but he chooses compassion. That choice tells us who he is. Elijah Wood gives Frodo a quiet vulnerability that becomes essential to the story. Frodo does not communicate courage through grand gestures. He communicates it through fear that never completely disappears. His eyes frequently reveal what he cannot explain to the people around him. He is curious at first, then overwhelmed, then increasingly isolated. Wood's strongest work often happens when Frodo says very little. At the Council of Elrond, Frodo watches powerful figures argue. Their voices rise, old resentments return. Everyone understands the danger, but no one wants to accept the burden. When Frodo offers to carry the ring, the moment works because he does not sound certain. He sounds frightened by his own decision. That fear makes the choice courageous. Sean Astin gives the film its emotional foundation as Sam. Sam is loyal without feeling like a perfect servant. He complains, hesitates, worries, and sometimes misunderstands what is happening. But when loyalty becomes difficult, he remains. The final river scene proves why Sam matters so much. Frodo tries to leave alone, believing separation will protect everyone. Sam follows him into the water despite being unable to swim. His action is not strategic, it is instinctive. He would rather risk his life than allow Frodo to face the road alone. Astin plays the moment without making Sam appear invincible. He panics. He sinks. He needs Frodo to save him. Yet the decision to enter the water reveals a form of courage more powerful than skill. Viggo Mortensen brings restraint to Aragorn. The character could easily have become a traditional fantasy hero who enters every scene with confidence. Instead, Mortensen plays him as someone carrying a history he does not fully trust himself to accept. Aragorn is capable, but he is not comfortable with what his bloodline represents. His strength comes from discipline rather than pride. The most important proof arrives when Frodo asks whether Aragorn would take the ring. Aragorn has every reason to believe power could help him. He is the heir of a broken kingdom. His ancestor failed to destroy the ring. The temptation could be framed as a chance to correct history. Instead, he helps Frodo live. Mortensen turns the refusal into an intimate decision. Aragorn does not need to explain his morality. His expression shows that he recognizes the temptation and chooses not to repeat the failure attached to his name. Sean Bean gives Boromir one of the film's most complicated performances. Boromir is not presented as secretly evil, he is frightened for his people. He has seen Gondor standing against an enemy that others discuss from safer distances. His desire to use the ring grows from responsibility, desperation, and pride. That complexity makes his failure painful rather than predictable. His final stand is unforgettable because it transforms the meaning of his character. After attempting to take the ring, Boromir could surrender to shame. Instead, he runs toward Merry and Pippin. He fights while wounded, continuing even after survival becomes impossible. The film allows him to fail and still recover his honor. That is mature storytelling. The second major strength is the construction of the story. The film has an enormous amount of information to deliver, but its central movement remains clear. The ring must leave the Shire. Frodo must reach safety. The ring must be taken toward destruction. Each stage expands the mission without removing its emotional simplicity. The structure repeatedly alternates between safety and danger. The Shire is followed by the road. Bree offers temporary shelter, then becomes exposed. Rivendell provides healing, then introduces the true size of the mission. Lothlorien offers beauty and rest, but temptation remains present. Each safe place becomes less permanent than the one before it. This creates the feeling that the Fellowship is moving deeper into a world where comfort cannot last. The film also uses parallel stories effectively. While Frodo travels toward Bree, Gandalf discovers Saruman's betrayal. The audience learns that the danger is growing faster than Frodo realizes. This creates dramatic tension without requiring constant action. We know the road is closing around the hobbits. They do not. The direction and visuals are another major achievement. Peter Jackson understands that fantasy requires sincerity. He does not frame the world as a joke or constantly remind us that the story is imaginary. The camera treats every culture, location, and historical memory with seriousness. That commitment gives the actors permission to believe completely in what they are doing. The visual scale is exceptional, but the film knows when to become intimate. The enormous halls of Moria would mean little without the close image of Gimli discovering what happened to his people. The Bridge of Khazad-dûm would be only spectacle without the Fellowship turning back in horror as Gandalf falls. The film gives grandeur and emotional purpose. Music and sound complete that effect. Our Shore score does not simply accompany Middle-earth, it organizes it. Different places and communities receive musical identities that evolve with the journey. The Shire theme creates a feeling of home so effectively that hearing even a fragment of it later can remind us of everything Frodo has left behind. The Fellowship's musical theme grows with the group. When the companions first set out, the music gives their formation a sense of heroic possibility, but the theme is not used constantly. Its absence during moments of division makes the loss of unity more powerful. The sound design gives danger its own physical presence. The Black Riders are heard as unnatural disturbances. The ring whispers, without speaking in a normal human way. The minds echo as though the darkness itself is listening. Silence is equally important. After Gandalf falls, the film allows grief to interrupt the adventure. The characters escape into daylight, but the brightness offers no relief. Howard Shore's music carries sorrow while the camera observes each member of the fellowship reacting differently. Aragorn forces them to continue. Boromir looks shattered. The hobbits appear unable to understand what they have lost. That sequence proves the film knows when not to rush. The most unforgettable scene is Gandalf's confrontation with the Balrog. Technically, the moment is spectacular. Flame fills the darkness. The creature scale makes Gandalf appear impossibly small. The bridge creates a clear physical boundary between safety and destruction. But spectacle is not why the scene survives in memory. It is unforgettable because Gandalf makes a choice. He knows the creature is beyond the ability of the others to defeat. He understands that the fellowship cannot continue if everyone stays to fight. So he places himself between his companions and the darkness. The scene turns protection into sacrifice. When Gandalf appears to defeat the Balrog, relief lasts only a second. The creature catches him, and the group watches that guy disappear. The suddenness creates emotional shock because the film has spent so much time allowing Gandalf to feel permanent. He seemed like the person who always knew what to do. His fall tells the fellowship and the audience that no one is guaranteed to reach the end. Here is what most people miss. The brilliance of the film lies in how often its greatest victories contain loss. Bilbo leaves the ring, but he loses the life he knew. Frodo reaches Rivendell, but the wound remains. The Fellowship escapes Moria, but Gandalf is gone. Boromir finds redemption, but only in his final moments. Frodo protects the mission by leaving, but the Fellowship is divided. The film refuses to treat progress as painless. That is why its hope feels earned. Courage does not erase grief. Loyalty does not prevent every failure. Good people can be tempted. Wise people can be defeated. What matters is what the characters choose afterward. The Fellowship of the Ring succeeds because every part of the production serves that idea. The acting makes the choices personal. The structure makes the journey clear. The visuals make the world feel ancient. The music connects emotion to place. The sound makes invisible danger feel close. Together, these elements create a fantasy film that does not ask you only to admire Middle-earth. It asks you to care about the people trying to save it. For all its craftsmanship, the Fellowship of the Ring is not flawless. Its weaknesses are rarely the result of laziness or lack of ambition. In fact, many of them come from the film trying to carry too much history, too many characters, and too much emotional weight inside a single opening chapter. The first weakness is pacing. The film takes its time establishing the Shire, Bilbo's departure, Gandalf's investigation, and Frodo's decision to leave. That patience gives the story emotional depth, but it can also make the opening feel unusually slow for someone expecting the adventure to begin immediately. The problem is not that these scenes are unnecessary, they are essential. The problem is that several of them communicate similar ideas. The Shire is safe, Bilbo is attached to the ring, Gandalf is worried, and Frodo does not yet understand the danger. Because the film reinforces those points repeatedly, the early movement can feel heavier than it needs to. For viewers already invested in Middle-earth, that time creates atmosphere. For everyone else, it may feel like the movie is asking for loyalty before it has earned it. The second weakness is the amount of exposition. Names, kingdoms, bloodlines, historical wars, magical objects, and ancient alliances arrive quickly. The film often communicates this information with confidence, but confidence does not automatically make it easy to absorb. A first-time viewer may struggle to remember the difference between Sauron, Saruman, Isildur, Gondor, Mordor, and the many locations introduced along the journey. Some names are spoken once and then become important much later. That creates distance. Instead of feeling emotionally connected to a historical reference, you may simply recognize that the film expects you to remember it. The opening prologue helps enormously, but it also begins the film with a concentrated block of information before the central characters have been introduced. It is visually powerful yet emotionally remote. We are watching the history of people we do not know, involving places we have not yet learned to care about. The film earns that history later, but on a first watch, it can feel like homework disguised as spectacle. Character balance is another limitation. The Fellowship contains 9 members, but only a few receive substantial development in this first film. Frodo, Gandalf, Aragorn, Boromir, and Sam have clear emotional journeys. Merry and Pippin are memorable through humor and loyalty, but they remain comparatively simple. Legolas and Gimli are visually distinctive and useful in action, yet their inner lives are barely explored. Gimli's discovery in Moria offers a brief chance to understand his personal connection to the place, but the film moves away from his grief quickly. Legolas receives even less emotional material. He observes, fights, and occasionally explains what others cannot see, but he rarely reveals what the journey means to him personally. This matters because the title emphasizes the fellowship as a group. The film succeeds in making the group feel iconic, but not every member feels equally human. The friendship between Legolas and Gimli, which later becomes one of the trilogy's most enjoyable relationships, is only beginning to form here. In this chapter, their cultural conflict is introduced more clearly than their personal connection. The tonal use of Merry and Pippin can also become uneven. Their humor brings energy to the film, especially during the darker stretches. But some of their mistakes exist mainly to create danger. Pippin's carelessness in Moria is the clearest example. The moment works as suspense, yet it reduces him temporarily to the person who causes the next crisis. The film later gives both hobbits more courage and purpose. But in this chapter, comedy occasionally limits their complexity. Another weakness is the way danger sometimes depends on timely rescue. The hobbits are saved by Aragorn in Bree. Frodo is rescued by Arwen after Weathertop. Gandalf escapes imprisonment through the arrival of the eagle. These moments are supported by the story, but when several rescues occur close together, the heroes can appear less active than the film intends. Frodo makes important moral decisions, yet in physical danger he often survives because someone stronger arrives. That is partly the point. He is not a warrior. His courage is not measured by combat. Still, the repetition can make his rule feel passive during long sections of the journey. The film's treatment of the Nazgûl also becomes less effective after their introduction. At first, they are terrifying. They feel inhuman, patient, and nearly unstoppable. The sequence beneath the tree is one of the most suspenseful scenes in the film because the hobbits have no ability to fight back. But after Weathertop and the river sequence, the riders temporarily disappear from the story. The immediate threat shifts towards Saruman, the mines, and the internal danger of the ring. That shift is necessary, yet it weakens the fear established around them. The film presents the Nazgûl as relentless hunters, but the middle section creates enough distance that their pursuit no longer feels constant. There is also a limitation in the portrayal of Sauron. Sauron works effectively as an abstract force. The eye, the fire, and the sense of being watched create psychological pressure. But abstraction can only carry so much emotional weight. Because Sauron has no meaningful personal interaction with Frodo, the conflict remains symbolic rather than intimate. The ring feels closer and more dangerous than the villain who created it. In many ways, Saruman becomes the more immediate antagonist because he speaks, betrays Gandalf, destroys the land, and builds an army. Sauron represents ultimate evil, but Saruman performs the evil we can actually see. This does not damage the story, but it does mean the central villain is less dramatically engaging than the secondary one. The action occasionally relies too heavily on invincibility. Legolas moves through battles with extraordinary precision. Aragorn survives overwhelming numbers. The Fellowship defeats enemies that appear physically superior. The sequences are entertaining, but the ease with which certain characters dominate can reduce tension. The cave troll fight avoids this problem because Frodo appears to suffer a serious injury. Later battles sometimes feel more controlled, with the heroes cutting through enemies before the danger can fully register. Boromir's final stand corrects this. His wounds remain, his strength has limits. The scene becomes powerful because the film allows consequence to enter the action. The emotional restraint of the film can also become a weakness. Characters often speak in elevated formal language. Their seriousness supports the mythic tone, but it can prevent conversations from feeling spontaneous. Relationships sometimes develop through declarations of loyalty rather than ordinary interaction. Aragorn and Arwen's relationship, for example, is visually beautiful and emotionally important, but the film gives them limited time together. Their bond depends partly on the audience accepting its history rather than experiencing that history directly. Similarly, Frodo and Bilbo clearly love one another, but the film moves through their separation before exploring much of their daily relationship. These emotional gaps are filled by performance, music, and visual memory. Even so, the story occasionally asks the audience to feel the depth of a relationship it has only briefly shown. The largest structural weakness is that the film cannot provide a complete resolution. It ends exactly where it should, with the fellowship divided and the true journey beginning. But the lack of closure may frustrate viewers approaching it as a standalone film. The central mission remains unfinished. Major characters are separated, the villain is untouched. The story closes emotionally, not narratively. That distinction matters. Frodo chooses to continue. Aragorn chooses responsibility. Sam proves his loyalty. Boromir finds redemption. Those arcs give the ending meaning, but they do not provide the satisfaction of a completed quest. Ultimately, these weaknesses do not destroy the experience. Most are the natural cost of adapting a story this large. The slow pacing creates immersion. The exposition creates history. The incomplete character development leaves room for later growth. The unresolved ending protects the honesty of the journey. Still, they explain why some people admire the Fellowship of the Ring more than they emotionally connect with it. The film demands attention, patience, and trust. When that trust is present, the world feels enormous and rewarding. When it is not, the same world can feel distant, dense, and longer than necessary. To understand what makes the Fellowship of the Ring distinctive, it helps to place it beside other films that also build worlds, assemble unlikely heroes, and send ordinary people toward impossible danger. The first comparison is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Both films arrived in 2001. Both introduce hidden worlds filled with ancient rules, unusual creatures, and a growing darkness connected to the central character. Both begin by inviting us into a place of wonder, but they create wonder differently. Harry Potter presents the magical world as a discovery. Harry enters Hogwarts and finds the life he was always meant to have. The new world gives him friendship, identity, and a sense of belonging that his ordinary life denied him. Frodo's journey moves in the opposite direction. He already belongs somewhere. The Shire is his home. The wider world does not rescue him from an unhappy life, it forces him away from a peaceful one. Wonder therefore carries more danger in the Fellowship of the Ring. Every beautiful location also reminds Frodo that he is moving farther from safety. Harry's story is about entering a world. Frodo's story is about trying to prevent a world from being destroyed. The Fellowship of the Ring also feels older and more severe. Harry Potter mixes danger with the structure of a school year, giving the story regular moments of play, discovery, and comfort. Middle-earth offers fewer secure boundaries. Once Frodo leaves home, danger can appear almost anywhere. If you love the warm communities, magical history, and detailed environments of the Fellowship of the Ring, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is a natural next watch. But if the slow pace and heavy mythology of Middle-earth push you away, Harry Potter may offer a more accessible and playful entrance into fantasy. The second comparison is Star Wars: A New Hope. The basic shapes of the stories are surprisingly close. A young person living far from the center of history receives a dangerous responsibility. A wise guide introduces a larger conflict. A group of very different companions forms around the mission. The hero must leave home and face an enemy whose power reaches across the world. Yet the emotional direction is different. Luke Skywalker wants to leave. He looks toward the horizon and imagines a larger life. Adventure answers a desire that already exists inside him. Frodo does not dream of becoming part of a war. He accepts the journey because refusing it would place others in danger. Luke moves toward possibility. Frodo moves away from loss. That difference changes the energy of each film. Star Wars moves quickly. Its storytelling is direct, its villains are visible, and its central objective becomes clear early. The Fellowship of the Ring is slower and more atmospheric. It allows history, geography, and temptation to complicate the mission. The Force offers Luke a path toward greater ability. The Ring offers Frodo power that must be rejected. That is perhaps the most important contrast. Many heroic stories are about learning to use power responsibly. The Fellowship of the Ring is about recognizing that some power cannot be used responsibly at all. If you love the fellowship itself, the mix of personalities, the sense of a larger war, and the movement from obscurity into legend, A New Hope offers a faster, more adventurous version of that pattern. The third comparison is The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Both films use natural landscapes, ancient prophecy, talking or magical creatures, and a conflict between a growing darkness and characters who appear too small to stop it. Both also treat fantasy with emotional sincerity, but Narnia is built more clearly around moral certainty. Aslan represents goodness. The White Witch represents oppression. Characters can fail, betray, and recover, but the moral structure remains easy to recognize. The Fellowship of the Ring is more interested in corruption within people who may genuinely want to do good. Boromir does not desire the ring because he wants to serve evil, he wants to save Gondor. Saruman does not initially frame his decision as surrender, he presents it as realism. That complexity gives Middle Earth a more adult emotional texture. The danger is not only choosing the wrong side, it is becoming convinced that the wrong method is necessary for the right cause. Narnia also places children at the center of a world that seems prepared for their arrival. Frodo enters a history that does not care whether he feels prepared. He is not fulfilling a role that guarantees victory. He is carrying a burden that has already defeated kings. If you love the mythic atmosphere and moral seriousness of the Fellowship of the Ring, but want something lighter and more direct, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is an excellent choice. The fourth comparison is Willow. Willow also places a small, underestimated hero inside a dangerous fantasy journey. Its protagonist begins outside the traditional image of a warrior, carries responsibility for someone vulnerable, and travels with companions whose loyalty develops over time. The emotional similarity is important. Both films argue that heroism is not determined by size, reputation, or physical strength. The person who seems least suited for the mission may become essential precisely because he is not motivated by conquest. However, Willow approaches fantasy with more playful energy. Its adventure feels faster, stranger, and less burdened by historical detail. The Fellowship of the Ring builds a world that seems to have existed for thousands of years before the story began. Willow often feels like a lively tale being invented as it moves. That difference affects the characters. Frodo carries the psychological weight of the ring, while Willow's central responsibility is more outward and protective. Frodo must fear what the object may awaken inside himself. Willow must protect something from the forces pursuing him. If you enjoyed the idea of an unlikely hero but found Tolkien's mythology too dense, Willow may be the better watch. So, what does the Fellowship of the Ring do that these films do not? It combines intimate moral pressure with enormous historical scale. Other fantasy films may ask whether the hero can defeat evil, master a gift, rescue someone, or fulfill a destiny. This film asks whether a group of good people can remain good while carrying the means to dominate the world. The central threat is therefore active even during quiet scenes. The ring does not need an army nearby to create danger. It can turn a conversation into a battle. It can make friendship unstable. It can transform love for a homeland into justification for control. That is where the film stands above many of its comparisons. Its weakness is that the same depth can make it less accessible. Star Wars delivers momentum faster. Harry Potter offers more immediate charm. Narnia creates clearer moral lines. Willow allows more humor and lightness. The Fellowship of the Ring asks more patience from you, but it also rewards that patience with a richer sense of consequence. The journey feels long because distance matters. History feels heavy because old failures are still shaping the present. Friendship is valuable because the ring is constantly trying to isolate the person carrying it. If you love this film, watch Star Wars, A New Hope for another mythic fellowship, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for immersive magical world building, The Lion, The Witch and the Wardrobe for sincere high fantasy, and Willow for an adventure centered on an underestimated hero. If you dislike this film because it felt slow or too dense, begin with Star Wars or Harry Potter. They offer many of the same pleasures with faster movement and clearer introductions. But if what stayed with you was the sadness beneath the beauty, the danger hidden inside good intentions, and the idea that refusing power can be more heroic than gaining it, very few fantasy films open the box as deeply as this one. The Fellowship of the Ring arrived in December 2001, at a moment when mainstream cinema was changing quickly and the wider world felt unusually uncertain. Hollywood had already proven that large scale franchises could dominate popular culture, but this film still represented a serious risk. Fantasy had produced successful movies before, yet Tolkien's world demanded invented languages, unfamiliar histories, multiple cultures, a nearly 3 hour running time, and an ending that openly promised more story rather than completing the central mission. At the same time, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone was introducing another enormous literary world to cinemas. Together, the two releases mid 2001 feel like a turning point when studios discovered that audiences would follow dense fantasy mythology if the world felt convincing enough to live inside. The film opened in the United States on December 19, 2001, just over 3 months after the September 11 attacks. It would be irresponsible to claim that Peter Jackson designed the film as a response to that event. The production had been underway long before it. But the timing affected the emotional world into which the film arrived. Later, cultural commentary has noted how a story about a peaceful homeland suddenly made vulnerable, ordinary people carrying fear into an uncertain war. And power becoming dangerous even in the hands of those who want to do good could resonate with audiences living through shock and anxiety. That resonance came from timing, not direct allegory. Here is where the context becomes complicated. The film offers moral clarity on the surface. Sauron represents domination. The Fellowship resists him. The Shire represents a life worth defending. But beneath that clear conflict, the story is suspicious of the language people use when they claim power is necessary for protection. Boromir does not want the ring because he enjoys cruelty. He wants it because his people are suffering. Saruman does not present his betrayal as meaningless evil. He frames it as accepting political reality. Even Gandalf and Galadriel understand that noble intentions would not protect them from corruption. That made the film emotionally useful without making it intellectually empty. It gave audiences heroes, purpose, companionship, and a visible enemy, but it also warned that fear can make control look reasonable. In a period filled with public discussion about security, war, loyalty, and sacrifice, that tension could feel immediate, even though Tolkien's story belonged to a much older literary tradition. The commercial response proved that the film was not merely serving an established fan base. Across all recorded releases, it has earned about $897.5 million worldwide. Its original domestic opening was roughly $47.2 million. But the more revealing number is how strongly it continued after that first weekend. People did not simply arrive because of curiosity. Word of mouth kept the journey moving. Critics and general audiences did not divide sharply over the film. They largely embraced it together, though often for slightly different reasons. Metacritic records a score of 92 from 34 critics, classified as universal acclaim, while its user score remains exceptionally high. Critics frequently focused on the achievement of adaptation, the scenery, the performances, and the conviction of the filmmaking. Audiences often connected more directly with the friendships, musical themes, battles, and emotional idea of leaving home. That broad agreement is important because fantasy had often been treated as a secondary genre, something impressive in design but not necessarily equal to serious dramatic filmmaking. The Fellowship of the Ring challenged that attitude. It was not praised only for effects or costumes. It entered conversations about directing, acting, writing, cinematography, music, and best picture. At the Academy Awards, it received 13 nominations and won 4. Cinematography for Andrew Lesnie, makeup for Peter Owen and Richard Taylor, original score for Howard Shore, and visual effects for Jim Rygill, Randall William Cook, Richard Taylor, and Mark Stetson. Ian McKellen was nominated for supporting actor, while Peter Jackson received a directing nomination and the film itself competed for Best Picture. Those wins tell us what the industry immediately recognized. The world looked real. Its creatures and cultures had physical identity. The music gave the journey emotional structure. The visual effects expanded the scale without completely separating the actors from the environment. But the losses are just as interesting. The film did not win Best Picture, directing, adapted screenplay, editing, art direction, costume design, or sound. You can argue that some of those omissions were understandable in a strong year. You can also argue that the film's achievement depended so completely on coordination between departments that separating one craft from another became almost artificial. The production design deserved even more attention because Middle-earth does not feel like a series of attractive sets. Each civilization expresses a different relationship with nature, history, labor, and power. The editing also deserves stronger recognition for controlling such a large amount of information without losing the central emotional line. And while Ian McKellen received the film's major acting nomination, Sean Bean's performance as Boromir could reasonably be called overlooked. His work gives temptation a human face and prevents the ring's corruption from becoming a simple fantasy concept. The British Academy responded even more strongly. BAFTA named The Fellowship of the Ring Best Film and awarded Peter Jackson for direction. That recognition suggested that the adaptation was being judged not merely as a successful blockbuster, but as a major piece of filmmaking. Its afterlife changed the way audiences experienced it. The theatrical version introduced the world, but expanded home video editions encouraged people to return, compare scenes, study production details, and treat the trilogy almost like a place they could revisit. Later, Blu-ray collections, digital access, and repeated theatrical re-releases allowed different generations to discover the film outside its original moment. Even decades later, anniversary screenings and extended edition returns have continued drawing audiences back into cinemas. That repeat viewing culture matters because the Fellowship of the Ring improves when the pressure of understanding the plot disappears. On a first watch, you are trying to remember names, locations, and rules. On later watches, you notice glances toward the ring, musical ideas appearing before a character changes, and moments of hesitation that quietly predict the collapse of the Fellowship. The film's reputation has therefore not depended only on nostalgia, it has been reinforced by structure. The more familiar you become with the world, the easier it is to see how deliberately the opening chapter prepares everything that follows. In 2021, the Library of Congress selected the film for the United States National Film Registry. That placement recognized it as part of film history rather than only franchise history. So, does it feel timeless or perfectly of its era? It is both. Some digital effects, editing choices, and moments of early 2000s action intensity reveal when it was made. The belief in a massive three-film theatrical event also belongs to a particular stage of blockbuster cinema. But the practical textures, emotional sincerity, moral tension, and refusal to treat fantasy with embarrassment have aged remarkably well. The film came from 2001, yet it does not feel trapped there. It feels like an old story told at exactly the right moment, then preserved strongly enough to keep finding new moments in which it matters. The Fellowship of the Ring leaves enough mystery around its world that audiences have spent years trying to fill the gaps. Some theories reveal details the film quietly supports. Others survive mainly because they offer a clever answer to a question the story never intended to make simple. The most famous theory begins with one sentence. Why did the Fellowship not ask the Eagles to carry Frodo directly to Mordor? One version claims Gandalf secretly planned to use the Eagles all along. According to this theory, his final instruction in Moria was not merely telling the Fellowship to escape, it was a coded message revealing his plan. The idea is entertaining, but it falls apart when you look closely. There is no sign that Aragorn, Frodo, or any other member understands Gandalf's words as a secret instruction. After leaving Moria, no one discusses finding the eagles or changing the mission toward an aerial route. Gandalf also had no guarantee that the eagles would agree to carry the ring. More importantly, secrecy is the Fellowship's greatest advantage. Sauron expects his enemies to use the ring as a weapon. He does not expect them to send two hobbits quietly into his territory to destroy it. A group of giant eagles flying directly toward Mount Doom would remove that advantage immediately. Mordor is watched, defended, and eventually protected from the air by the Nazgul. The mission would become visible long before Frodo reached the mountain. Discussion of the question often returns to this central point. The strategy depends on entering Mordor without Sauron realizing the ring is being carried toward destruction. The theory also misunderstands the Eagles. They are not a transportation service waiting for Gandalf to issue orders. They are independent and powerful beings who intervene at particular moments. Asking them to carry the most corrupting object in Middle Earth would create another risk the story never needs to test. The Eagle's theory is therefore weaker than it first appears. Gandalf's final instruction means exactly what the Fellowship understands it to mean: leave before the Balrog kills them too. A second theory suggests that Gandalf knew the Balrog was waiting in Moria and intentionally entered the mines because he understood that his death would allow him to return with greater power. This interpretation turns Gandalf into a strategist sacrificing one version of himself to create another. The problem is that the film does not show him behaving like someone executing a secret plan. He resists entering Moria. His expression changes when he understands what is approaching. His confrontation with the Balrog feels like an emergency, not an appointment. Saruman appears to know that a terrible force exists beneath the mountain, but even that does not prove Gandalf knows its exact identity. Discussions among Tolkien readers regularly point out that Gandalf may understand Moria contains an ancient danger without knowing that Durin's Bane is specifically a Balrog. The recognition comes only when the creature is encountered. The theory also gives Gandalf control over events that the film presents as sacrifice. His return later in the larger story may give meaning to his fall, but that does not mean he planned it. The emotional power of the bridge comes from Gandalf choosing to protect the Fellowship when the situation becomes hopeless. He does not walk into Moria to become stronger. He stands on the bridge because everyone behind him will die if he does not. A third theory asks whether the ring deliberately chooses Frodo. This one holds up better, but only partially. The film clearly presents the ring as having a will. It abandons Gollum, it allows Bilbo to find it. It tries to return to Sauron. It changes size, pulls at the attention of nearby characters, and seems to create opportunities for itself. That makes it reasonable to believe the ring did not reach Frodo through pure accident. But saying it specifically selected Frodo as the perfect person to carry it back to Mordor gives the ring too much foresight. Frodo inherits it because Bilbo possesses it. The ring may recognize opportunities and influence behavior, but the film does not prove that it can predict every step of the journey. In fact, Frodo becomes dangerous to the ring precisely because he lacks the desire it normally exploits. The ring wants to be found and used. Frodo intends to destroy it. It may have helped create the circumstances that placed it in his hands, but that does not mean it understood what he would choose. Another popular interpretation argues that Boromir is already under the ring's control before the Fellowship leaves Rivendell. The film certainly shows his attention locking onto it during the council. He immediately imagines using it to defend Gondor. Later, his interest becomes more intense until he attempts to take it from Frodo. But describing this as complete control removes the tragedy from his character. The ring does not invent Boromir's fear. Gondor is already under pressure. He already feels abandoned by people who debate while his homeland suffers. The ring takes those real emotions and twists them into justification. That is more frightening than mind control. Boromir remains responsible for his choice, but he is not reduced to a secret servant of Sauron. His final actions prove that the person beneath the temptation still exists. Once the ring is beyond his reach, he recognizes what he has done and gives his life protecting Merry and Pippin. The strongest interpretation is that the ring amplifies what is already present. It magnifies Gandalf's potential authority, Galadriel's desire to preserve beauty, Boromir's desperation to protect Gondor, and Frodo's growing fear of losing the mission. It offers each person a different argument because corruption becomes most effective when it sounds personal. One final theory claims that Frodo's vision from Ahriman allows him to see the future. After putting on the ring, he witnesses war, destruction, and Sauron's attention spreading across Middle-earth. But the scene works better as heightened perception than prophecy. Frodo is standing upon a place associated with extraordinary sight while wearing an object that connects him to the enemy. He is not necessarily seeing events that have already been predetermined. He is seeing the danger moving through the world and the possible future awaiting it. That distinction protects one of the film's central ideas. The outcome is not fixed. Middle-earth is approaching destruction, but individual choices can still redirect the path. The best theories do not replace the story, they make you look closer at it. And when you do, the film seems to support one conclusion again and again. The ring rarely creates weakness from nothing. It finds the fear, pride, grief, or desire already inside someone, then convinces that person that surrender is actually a form of strength. Beneath the battles, creatures, and ancient kingdoms, the Fellowship of the Ring is really about the burden of choice. Frodo does not choose the world he inherits. He does not create the ring, begin the war, or ask to become responsible for the future of Middle-earth. He simply reaches a moment when walking away would place everyone he loves in greater danger. That is what makes his journey human. Most people do not control when responsibility arrives. It may come through loss, family, work, illness, fear, or a promise made before the full cost was understood. The burden can feel unfair because it often is unfair. But the film suggests that courage does not begin by pretending the burden is deserved. Courage begins by asking what must be done now. Frodo repeatedly wishes that the ring had never come to him. That feeling is not weakness, it is honesty. He recognizes that the journey is changing him before he has the language to explain how. The deeper meaning lies in what happens after that regret. Frodo cannot change the history that placed the ring in his hands, but he can choose what he does with it. This becomes one of the film's clearest ideas. We do not control every event that shapes our lives, but we still participate in deciding what those events make of us. The ring represents power, but it also represents obsession. It turns every fear into a reason to hold on tighter. Bilbo fears losing part of himself. Boromir fears losing his homeland. Galadriel understands the possibility of losing her world. Each person can imagine a noble reason to keep the ring. That is why it is dangerous. Temptation rarely introduces itself by saying it wants to destroy you. It tells you that you deserve control. It tells you that no one else understands the situation. It promises that one compromise will prevent something worse. The ring offers certainty in a world where certainty has disappeared. For Boromir, that promise becomes almost impossible to resist. He sees Gondor carrying the weight of the war while others live at a safer distance. His frustration is understandable. His conclusion is not. He begins believing that because his fear is real, any response to that fear must be justified. That mistake appears far beyond fantasy. People often confuse the truth of an emotion with the correctness of a decision. Anger may be real without making cruelty right. Fear may be real without making control necessary. Love may be real without making possession healthy. The film never tells us to reject emotion. It tells us to examine what emotion asks us to become. This is why Boromir remains sympathetic even after he fails. The story understands how he reached that moment. It also refuses to excuse the harm he nearly causes. His redemption arrives when he stops defending his fear and acts according to his deeper values. He cannot undo what happened with Frodo, but he can choose who he will be in the next moment. That choice costs him everything. The theme of mercy is equally important. Bilbo once spared Gollum not because Gollum deserved trust, but because Bilbo recognized his misery. Gandalf understands that pity may have consequences no one can predict. The story treats mercy not as softness, but as humility. To show mercy is to admit that you do not know every role another person may still play. This becomes especially meaningful in a world obsessed with control. The ring promises the power to force outcomes. Mercy accepts uncertainty. It allows another life to continue without knowing whether that decision will later bring gratitude, danger, or something far more complicated. The film suggests that goodness often requires acting without guarantees. Sam does not know whether Frodo will succeed when he follows him into the water. Aragorn does not know whether refusing the ring will help restore his kingdom. Frodo does not know whether he can reach Mordor when he agrees to carry it. They act because the choice is right, not because success is certain. Friendship becomes the answer to isolation. The ring tries to separate a person carrying it from everyone else. It creates secrecy, suspicion, and the belief that no one can be trusted. Frodo begins experiencing a burden that his companions cannot fully see. The heavier it becomes, the more alone he feels. That isolation is not merely supernatural. People carrying grief, fear, or responsibility often feel surrounded and alone at the same time. Others may care deeply without being able to enter the private weight of the experience. The film does not pretend friendship can remove every burden. Sam cannot carry Frodo's fear for him. Aragorn cannot make the ring harmless. Gandalf cannot promise the road will end safely. What friendship can do is refuse abandonment. That difference matters. Sam's loyalty is powerful because he does not claim to understand everything. He simply remains. He walks when Frodo walks. He enters the water when Frodo tries to leave. His presence tells Frodo that isolation may feel necessary, but it does not have to become complete. The fellowship represents a larger version of the same idea. Elves, dwarfs, men, hobbits, and a wizard bring all suspicion into the group. They do not erase those differences, they choose a shared purpose despite them. Their unity is fragile because real unity always is. It must survive disagreement, exhaustion, fear, and failure. The breaking of the fellowship does not prove the idea was false. It proves that fellowship is not measured only by physical togetherness. After the group separates, each character continues acting according to the promises formed within it. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli pursue Merry and Pippin. Sam remains beside Frodo. Boromir dies protecting companions he once treated lightly. The fellowship survives as responsibility. Another recurring symbol is the road. The road carries characters away from certainty. At first, it appears gentle, moving between green fields and quiet paths. Later, it becomes dangerous, eaten, frozen, broken, or blocked. The changing road reflects the changing understanding of the journey. At the beginning, Frodo thinks danger may be contained by reaching the next safe place. First Bree, then Rivendell. But every destination reveals a larger responsibility. There is no permanent shelter from the decision he has accepted. This is how adulthood often feels. Problems that once appear temporary become part of a wider reality. Reaching one goal does not end on certainty, it reveals the next part of the road. The film does not present this as hopeless, it presents movement itself as a form of hope. Frodo does not need to see Mount Doom clearly to take the next step. He only needs enough courage for the ground directly in front of him. Aragorn's deeper journey concerns identity. He has spent years distancing himself from his inheritance because he fears repeating Isildur's failure. This caution looks responsible, but it also becomes a way of avoiding the risk of becoming who others need him to be. The ring gives him the perfect test. He can seize power and claim that history demands it, or he can prove that blood does not control character. When Aragorn refuses to take the ring, he does not erase his ancestry. It changes its meaning. The film suggests that inheritance is not destiny. Families, nations, and cultures pass both strength and failure forward. The next generation may repeat those patterns, reject them, or transform them. Aragorn becomes worthy of leadership not because his blood guarantees greatness, but because he refuses the temptation that defeated his ancestor. The final deeper layer is the value of ordinary life. The Shire contains no great armies, towers, or legendary weapons. Its people care about meals, gardens, birthdays, stories, and familiar roads. Against the scale of Middle Earth, these concerns may seem unimportant, but they are the reason the world deserves saving. The film does not argue that ordinary life is separate from heroism. It argues that ordinary life gives heroism meaning. Frodo does not endure because he wants a statue or a throne. He continues because somewhere behind him exists a place where people can live without thinking about Sauron. The smallest comforts become acts of resistance against a world built on domination. A shared meal, a song, a garden, a hand reaching into the water. These moments do not look as powerful as armies, but the film understands that armies exist to protect the possibility of such moments. That is what the Fellowship of the Ring is really about. Beneath the surface, power asks to be possessed, fear asks to be obeyed, history asks to be repeated. The film answers with mercy, friendship, restraint, and the courage to keep walking without knowing how the journey will end. The legacy of the Fellowship of the Ring begins with a risk that now looks almost obvious only because it succeeded. Before its release, producing three interconnected fantasy films as one enormous creative undertaking was not a guaranteed model for blockbuster cinema. The project required audiences to commit to a story that would remain unfinished for years, while the studio committed resources before knowing how the first chapter would be received. Its success helped prove that serialized cinema could be planned as a unified long form experience rather than built one sequel at a time. The British Film Institute later identified carefully constructed multi part franchises such as The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter as part of the movement that made serialized blockbuster storytelling more culturally respectable. That influence can be seen in the way later studios approach fantasy worlds, literary adaptations, and franchise planning. The lesson was not simply that audiences liked dragons, swords, or invented maps. The deeper lesson was that audiences would accept unfamiliar names, extended running times, complicated mythology, and incomplete endings when the filmmakers treated the world with confidence. The film helped fantasy escape the assumption that it had to be lightweight, ironic, or aimed only at children. Peter Jackson does not stand outside Middle Earth and apologize for it. The actors do not behave as though they are embarrassed by the costumes or invented languages. The emotions are played with the seriousness of historical drama. That sincerity became one of the film's most important influences. Later fantasy productions could still use humor, but they no longer needed to make fun of their own worlds to reach a broad audience. The Fellowship of the Ring showed that commitment itself could create accessibility. When every department believes in the world, the audience is more willing to enter it. Its technical influence is equally important. The film combines real landscapes, physical sets, prosthetic makeup, miniatures, forced perspective, motion control photography, digital environments, and computer generated creatures. It does not insist that one method must solve every visual problem. That philosophy helped establish a standard for modern fantasy filmmaking. Use the technique that best protects the illusion. A miniature can provide texture, a digital extension can provide scale. Forced perspective can preserve interaction between performers. Prosthetics can give an actor something physical to inhabit. Computer generated imagery can create movement or size that practical construction cannot safely achieve. The result matters more than proving which tool is superior. The film's approach to scale also influenced how imaginary worlds could be photographed. Middle Earth is not presented only through wide landscape shots. It is made believable through doors, clothing, weapons, food, maps, damaged stone, and differences in architecture. The world feels large because the details feel specific. That principle became central to later franchise filmmaking. Audiences do not believe in a fictional world merely because the camera shows an enormous city. They believe when that city appears to contain history, labor, culture, and ordinary life. The production also transformed the international image of New Zealand. The New Zealand Film Commission describes the trilogy's impact on the country and its screen industry as significant and enduring, noting that thousands of cast and crew were employed between 1999 and 2004, while economic benefits spread through Wellington and other regions. New Zealand did not remain only the location where Middle Earth was filmed. The production helped demonstrate that major global filmmaking infrastructure, talent, effects work, and large-scale coordination could operate there. The landscapes became internationally recognizable, while the artist behind the landscapes gained a stronger position within the industry. Howard Shore's music created another lasting influence. His score demonstrated how a franchise could use recurring musical themes not merely as recognizable branding, but as storytelling. Melodies belong to cultures, places, moral ideas, and relationships. They change as the characters change. That approach gives the trilogy musical memory. When a theme returns, the audience does not only recognize it, the audience remembers what has been lost, protected, or transformed since it was last heard. The Films Awards recognition confirmed that the industry understood the achievement as more than commercial spectacle. It led the 74th Academy Awards with 13 nominations and won for cinematography, makeup, original score, and visual effects. But reputation is not measured only by awards received near release. In 2021, the Fellowship of the Ring was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry. The Library of Congress includes films considered culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant, placing this fantasy blockbuster within a preserved record of American cinema. That recognition captures how the film's reputation has grown. It was initially celebrated as an extraordinary adaptation and technical achievement. Over time, it became something more, a reference point for how to build a fantasy world, how to begin a trilogy, how to balance practical and digital craftsmanship, and how to make spectacle serve character. Some effects reveal their age. Certain action choices belong unmistakably to early 2000 cinema. Yet the foundation remains strong because the film was never dependent on novelty alone. Its landscapes still feel vast, its friendships still feel sincere, its temptations still feel human, its grief still carries weight. The Fellowship of the Ring changed cinema not by inventing fantasy, sequels, visual effects, or epic storytelling. It changed cinema by bringing those elements together with unusual conviction and proving that millions of people would follow a small group of characters into an unfamiliar world if the emotional road beneath them fell true. Its legacy is not simply that more fantasy films were made afterward. Its legacy is that fantasy was allowed to dream bigger without losing sight of the smallest person walking through the frame. Alright, full spoilers from this point. If you haven't seen the film yet, close this now, go watch it, and come back when you're ready. Trust me, you want to experience it fresh. The central twist of the Fellowship of the Ring is not that the ring is powerful, the film tells us that immediately. The real revelation is that its greatest weapon is persuasion. From the beginning, every major turning point is shaped by someone believing they can control what should never be controlled. Isildur refuses to destroy it. Bilbo keeps it while insisting it is merely useful. Boromir imagines saving Gondor with it. Saruman decides that joining overwhelming power is wiser than resisting it. Different arguments lead to the same command: keep the ring. Bilbo's frightening transformation inside Bag End shows what possession has already done to him. He remains loving and recognizable, but the threat of losing the ring turns affection into aggression. Gandalf refuses to take it because he knows it would tempt him through his desire to do good. Galadriel later faces the same test, briefly imagining herself as a beautiful but terrifying ruler before rejecting it. Their refusal reveals the film's definition of strength. Power is not always proven by what you can hold. Sometimes it is proven by what you can release. Saruman makes the opposite choice. He presents surrender as realism and destroys the land around Isengard to build an army. The contrast is visual. The Shire lives with nature. Rivendell flows through it. Isengard tears into the earth and consumes it. Saruman's corruption changes the landscape before his soldiers ever enter battle. The Black Riders reveal the final destination of surrender. They were once kings, but their identities have been erased by the rings they accepted. Frodo's wound at Weathertop begins pulling him toward the same shadow world. Even after Rivendell heals his body, the experience leaves a lasting mark. Survival does not necessarily mean returning to who you were before. At the Council of Elrond, the Fellowship is created inside an argument that already predicts its collapse. Elves, dwarfs, and men return to old distrust. Boromir wants to use the ring. The room becomes increasingly hostile until Frodo accepts the burden everyone else is discussing. 8 companions can defend him from enemies, but only Frodo carries the danger capable of dividing them from within. Caradhras forces the group into Moria, where another civilization has been destroyed by uncontrolled desire. The dwarfs dug too deeply, awakening the Balrog. Their empty halls turn the film's warning into architecture. Ambition without restraint can leave greatness looking like a tomb. The door opens through a word connected to friendship, yet collapses behind the group. Fellowship grants them entry, but darkness will test whether it can keep them together. Inside, Pippin's mistake awakens the minds. The cave troll battle shows the fellowship at its strongest with every member contributing. Frodo's mithril shirt saves his body, but no armor can protect his mind from the ring. Then the Balrog arrives. Gandalf's stand on the bridge transforms leadership into sacrifice. He remains behind because everyone else will die if he does not. When he falls, the fellowship loses its guide, and Aragorn must make his first painful leadership decision. He forces the grieving survivors onward because remaining exposed would turn one death into many. At Lothlorien, Galadriel recognizes a private fear inside each traveler. Her mirror shows Frodo a possible ruined Shire, connecting the war directly to home. The vision is not a guaranteed future, it is what may happen if he fails. That fear follows him to Amon Hen, where the ring finally breaks the group. Boromir approaches Frodo with an argument built from real suffering. Gondor is under attack, and he believes the ring can save it. His fear is understandable. His conclusion is disastrous. When Frodo refuses, Boromir tries to seize it. The enemy is no longer only outside the Fellowship. Frodo escapes by wearing the ring and sees war spreading across Middle-earth. He realizes that remaining with the group will continue exposing everyone to temptation, while leaving will force him to carry the burden almost alone. Aragorn then faces the film's most important test. Frodo asks whether he would take the ring. As Isildur's heir, Aragorn could claim it as a chance to restore his kingdom and correct the failure of his bloodline. Instead, he closes Frodo's hand around it and lets him go. Aragorn becomes worthy of kingship by refusing the power that destroyed his ancestor. The Uruk-hai attack, and Merry and Pippin deliberately draw them away from Frodo. Boromir hears their cries and runs to defend them. His final stand answers his earlier failure. He cannot undo his attack on Frodo, but he can choose who he will be next. Even after multiple arrows strike him, he continues fighting. His redemption is not a speech. It is an action taken when no reward remains. Before dying, Boromir admits his failure and recognizes Aragorn as the leader Gondor needs. Aragorn, in turn, finally accepts responsibility for their people. Boromir recovers his honor as Aragorn begins accepting his identity. Frodo prepares to cross the river alone, believing isolation is the only protection left. Sam follows despite being unable to swim and begins sinking. That moment gives the film its answer to the ring. The ring isolates. Sam remains. Frodo pulls him into the boat. Sam cannot remove the burden, but he can refuse to let Frodo disappear inside it alone. There is no post-credits scene. The ending itself is the promise of continuation. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli choose to rescue Merry and Pippin, while Frodo and Sam move toward Mordor. Gandalf is gone. Boromir is dead. 2 hobbits have been captured. The Fellowship has broken physically. Yet Sauron still does not possess the ring. That is the quiet victory. The heroes have preserved the values the ring tries to destroy: loyalty, mercy, restraint, sacrifice, and the freedom to choose differently from the failures of the past. My reaction to the ending is mixed but deeply emotional. It offers almost no narrative closure, yet it completes the film's moral journey. Frodo no longer believes courage means feeling ready. Aragorn no longer believes his ancestry must control his future. Sam proves that fellowship can survive separation. The final image shows 2 small figures walking toward darkness, not because they believe success is guaranteed, but because they understand what will happen if they stop. The Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, is an ambitious, sincere, and technically remarkable fantasy film. Its warmth is ancient, its music is unforgettable, and its strongest characters carry real emotional weight. Peter Jackson creates a journey in which landscapes feel like history, friendship feels like resistance, and a small object can reveal the deepest sweetness inside someone who believes they are acting for the right reasons. But admiration is not the same as complete connection. My personal rating for The Fellowship of the Ring is 5.1 out of 10. That rating may sound unusually low for a film with this level of craftsmanship, but it reflects the difference between respecting what a movie achieves and fully enjoying the experience of watching it. The film is visually extraordinary, yet its deliberate pacing can feel heavy. Its mythology is rich, but the number of names, locations, bloodlines, and historical references can create distance. Several members of the Fellowship are iconic, without receiving enough emotional development in this first chapter, and the story ends with a central mission only beginning. The film rewards patience, but it demands a great deal of it. You should watch this if you love immersive fantasy worlds, practical production design, sweeping landscapes, detailed mythology, powerful music, and stories that treat friendship and sacrifice with complete sincerity. It is especially suitable for you if you enjoy slow building adventures where atmosphere matters as much as action. You may struggle with it if you prefer faster storytelling, lighter dialogue, simpler mythology, or a film that reaches a complete resolution before the credits. If long stretches of travel, exposition, and solemn conversation normally pull you out of a story, this may feel more admirable than entertaining. For a first viewing, streaming is the easiest option because it allows you to pause, absorb the names, and return to details you may miss. But the film's landscapes, music, and scale are unquestionably stronger in a cinema. For devoted fantasy fans, the extended edition is worth owning because the additional material gives more texture to characters and cultures that sometimes feel underdeveloped in the theatrical version. The film's greatest achievement is not the size of Middle Earth. It is the belief that history can change because someone without an army, a throne, or any desire for glory chooses to keep walking. The fellowship breaks, its purpose does not. The road becomes darker, hope does not disappear. And the smallest person in the story carries a choice that every powerful person before him failed to make. Every film is a box, and we open this one together. Thank you for spending this journey with me here at the Film Box. We crossed the Shire, entered the darkness of Moria, watched the fellowship form and fracture, and looked beneath the adventure to uncover the fear, mercy, loyalty, and temptation holding the entire story together. Share your verdict in the comments. Does The Fellowship of the Ring deserve its reputation as one of the greatest fantasy films ever made? Or do its slow pacing and unfinished structure hold it back? And here is the question I really want you to answer. If the ring offered you the power to fix the one problem that matters most in your life, would you honestly be able to refuse it? Leave your rating and your answer below. I want to know whether you see the ring as a symbol of power, addiction, fear, responsibility, or something completely different. If this breakdown helped you see the film from a new angle, support the Film Box by liking the video and subscribing. It helps us continue opening stories layer by layer, looking beyond what happened to understand why it mattered. Our next journey will take us into another cinematic world filled with secrets, difficult choices, and details hiding in plain sight. Until then, protect what matters, question the power that promises to solve everything, and never underestimate how far one loyal friend can help you travel. Every film is a box, and we've only just started opening them. That's the Film Box. See you in the next one.